Good morning. Hope you're having a great conference. So I'm here to talk through a little bit of a journey, talking about the code of conduct in Europe and how that's evolved into regulation across Europe. And actually beyond that, how the regulation in Europe is probably going to affect other jurisdictions, countries around the world. There's an ongoing debate, and I think Europe's leading the way in this. So again, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey. So what's the code of conduct? This is a bit of a starting point. So back in 2008, it was decided by a few experts in the data center industry that we try and come up with a set of best practices to help with data center energy efficiency. As we all know, data center energy efficiency and the consumption of electricity by data centers is an issue. It's an issue for governments. Governments are looking at it. It's an issue for the media. You know, we're being beaten up a little bit by the media in terms of our energy consumption. There's an argument that we're using about 1.5% of global energy production. That figure may be true, it may not. And I think it's about 3% in total for digital infrastructure generally, and those two numbers are often confused. About 1.5% for data centers. So again, Code of Conduct, back in 2008, first government set of published guidelines for data center energy efficiency best practices. And it's free to download. Anybody can download it, anybody can gain access to it, anybody can use it, and based on the fact that it's actually a tried and tested set of best practices, it will save you energy and it will save you money in your data center if you choose to apply it. Not only does it talk about the power, the cooling, all the traditional things, it also talks about the IT side of things as well. So it really is a bit of a comprehensive guide. And again, I'm going to repeat this, it's free to download. Go and use it. There is actually a scheme associated with it. You don't have to use the scheme. There's a reporting scheme, and the idea is that this is designed to collect data over time to try and better understand the industry in Europe. If you do choose to abide by the scheme, you get to use one of these logos. There's a participant logo. If you're an operator or owner of data centers, you can be a participant and record your energy usage over an annualized period. If you're an endorser, such as Huawei, a manufacturer of equipment, supplier of equipment to the industry, you can endorse the code of conduct and you can carry the logo as an endorser. Moving on, couple of key items on the code of conduct. And again, this is the start of a journey. This isn't the end of the journey by any means. It is updated every year. The 2023 version was released in February this year. It's available from this URL, and I think you will get these slides later on, so feel free to go and have a look at this document. Key thing, though, here, really key thing, is the best practices that are incorporated in the Code of Conduct are actually now incorporated in a true standard, a European standard. You may or may not have heard of it. It's called EN 5600, you know, the kind of thing you're going to remember, obviously. But it is out there. It is a published European standard, and I'll come more onto what that really means as we go through this journey. Key point being, though, these practices are now part of a published international standard. More than that, they're actually being incorporated into a document that you can see here, 5600 5-1, which is a auditable document. Now that's key. That's key because we know that governments are keen to look at our industry and potentially regulate. So more on that as we go through. The taxonomy, the EU taxonomy and CSRD. The taxonomy is merely a set of requirements for reporting that are specific to specific industries, the data center industry being one of those. So what the taxonomy does effectively is describe what you should be reporting on and how you should be reporting for a particular type of industry, and again, in this case, data centers. The CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, uses the taxonomy for its reporting requirements. The taxonomy itself references the Code of Conduct. So again, you can see where this trail's going. CSRD is a non-financial reporting directive. So NFRD was something that all corporates above a certain size were required to report on. So again, non-financial reporting. CSRD builds on that and puts in the sustainability element. What that really means is that you are going to have to report, if you're in the data center industry and you have a revenue of more than 150 million euros in Europe, you are going to have to report against these requirements. That doesn't mean that you have to be a European-based business. It means that you have operations in Europe. So you can be based anywhere in the world. If you've got operations in Europe related to data centers, more than 150 million, you're in this scheme. The reporting period for next year, is for next year, for the previous 12 months. So we're talking about reporting in June 2024 for the period starting June 2023. So this is on us. As I keep saying, the train is in the tunnel and coming towards us. Not many people are actually aware that this even is the case. Now, how efficiently is this going to be checked? Debatable. The one key thing, though, is that while the Commission may not be checking this in the first few months or the first few years, what will happen is that any sustainable fund will be required by the Commission to look at the audited results of this reporting. And if you don't have it, you will not get sustainable funding. So the way the Commission are going to police this is basically by reducing your access to cheap funding. Interesting point. Whether that applies to companies outside Europe looking in and looking at European sustainable funding is open to debate. The key point about CSRD, though, one of the interesting points, and the reason I'm going to go on to some slides later, is the reporting requirements are based on international standards, ISO standards. So ISO being the International Standards Organization who create 9,000, 27,000, 50,000, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So many people aren't aware that there are data center sustainability metrics published by ISO. Worth knowing because you're going to have to report against them very shortly. So, a different DG in Europe is also working on the EED, the Energy Efficiency Directive. Completely separate DG, completely separate set of reporting, but nonetheless, data center reporting requirements. The EED will require reporting for any data center with an IT load of more than 500 kilowatts. So that's going to capture a lot of people that are currently below the radar. It will also require the creation of a national database of all data centers. So national databases across Europe for all data centers with more than 500 kilowatts of IT load. So again, you're going to get caught in this without any question. As I said earlier, this is based on standardized ISO metrics. The final stakeholder meeting for the EED is on the 15th of June this year. That's the final of 3 meetings. Thereafter, this will be published later this year. Again, you're going to get caught up in this. So, I mentioned the sustainability metrics. What are they? Here you go. Here is the ISO 30134 series. It's a little bit dry. I'm not going to walk you through it. But the really key thing here is that some of you may have heard of a metric called PUE. Governments are starting to measure us on it. The Dutch government, or Amsterdam actually is, and Frankfurt are saying, you have to have a certain PUE for your data center, otherwise you can't build it by design. PUE actually isn't an efficiency metric. It's used as a proxy. It's not really that good for efficiency. In fact, it doesn't really cover efficiency at all. But what you have got in this series is other things as well. So we talk about energy reuse. Again, increasingly in Europe, we are going to be mandated to reuse heat from data centers, so-called waste heat from data centers. There's a metric here for measuring it. Renewable energy factor. How much renewable energy are you actually using in your data center? What proportion of the energy you're using is actually sustainable and renewable? So I'm not going to go through all of these. You can see it for yourself. Probably one that's worth mentioning, actually, water. There's a big debate about water usage in data centers and just the degree to which we're consuming potable water in particular. So again, there's a metric here to measure it. The really interesting thing, and I think one of the smart things that the Commission have done, is actually base their reporting requirements on standardized metrics. So we're going to get a level playing field. And something that one of the Commission policy officers said to me is that it took us 15 years to regulate the glass-blowing industry. Glass-blowing, what's that got to do with data centers? Well, absolutely nothing, obviously. But nonetheless, they had no idea how many glass-blowing factories or how much energy the glass-blowing industry was using. It took them 15 years to regulate it. We are in the same position. The difference is we're at the start of this journey. So they are on our case. It will happen. It will become more and more regulated, almost certainly. This is the start of a journey. As they collect more data, they'll be looking more closely. So be aware. 5600, I mentioned this, and one of the reasons I mentioned 5600 is that its impact beyond Europe, ironically. It's a European standard, it is a standard, and therefore it's an international standard, but its impact beyond Europe. 5600, produced by Senelec, as I've said here, et cetera, et cetera. You can read that for yourselves, I'm not going to go through it. But the really key thing about 5600, it is the basis for a true ISO international standard reflecting data centers. And the reason I say this is largely because Europe is leading in this area right now. But we know other governments tend to follow suit. They tend to see what's going on in a particular region, they see what people are doing, they see what's happening, they see how effective it is, and what they do is often follow suit. So I know that in the US, they're looking at this very, very closely. They will be coming up with something very similar. Won't be the same, it'll look similar, it'll have the same sort of impact, it'll be based on the same sort of criteria, and it will be based, whatever they do is going to be based on those ISO metrics that you've just seen. And I think, again, the point about 5600 is that Europe are very much taking the lead on this. Others will follow. And the point being, this is the 5600 standard that Europe are developing. Again, you can get the slides on this. Don't bother to have a look. It's all there. It's available. The key thing about this particular slide, though, is if you notice, the European standard, the 5600 standard, also references the ISO metrics, the ISO sustainability metrics. So what's happening is you're getting a combination, a dovetailing of these international standards, all of which are starting to reference each other. And I think, as we all know in the data center industry, there's a great deal of uncertainty about how much energy we're consuming, how many data centers there are. This standardized reporting will produce a much more level playing field. It'll produce a much greater depth of understanding about how the industry works and what we're actually doing. So again, big dovetail here. And if we go beyond that, if we go beyond the 5600 standard, we are actually developing a true ISO standard. It's going beyond Europe. It's going beyond the European region. It's actually going international. So what we're finding now is that the standards community, particularly around data centers, are getting much more cohesive. You'll have heard about things like Uptime Institute standards, TIA standards, tiers, levels, whatever. What we've got now coming up, and this is the final slide, what we've actually got is a true international ISO-based standards for data centers. This is the future. This is where it's going to go. If you're thinking about certification for your data center in the future, this is probably going to have to be on the radar, because no longer have we got these competing standards or non-standards in some cases. This is something that will be global. It'll be across the entire industry. You can see it's actually in the process of being published at the moment. 2021 was the last release. The rest will be released this year. And once they're all released, I think you'll see much more focus on this. So again, Europe's leading the way in this. We are leading the way. We're pushing forward. There is a great deal of internationalization going on in this. There's a great deal of more reporting required. Governments are taking a serious view on this. The media is giving us a lot of pressure. We need to explain to the media how we're doing what we're doing and why we're doing it, and ideally, the preventative elements that we're creating in our industry rather than just the consumptive elements. Watch this space. As I said, the train is in the tunnel. It's coming towards us. The lights are glowing. Some of you in this room may or may not have been aware that these reporting requirements are coming out, but the reality is they're on us now. So it's happening. Hopefully this will give you a little bit of either a warning or a briefing to just look out for what's coming and what you may need to be doing. I know there's no time for questions, but if you do want to ask any questions, I'm free for the rest of the day. I'll be floating around, certainly at lunch, so feel free to come and put me on the spot. Thank you.